Hi guys, so I am home with a sick kid today, and that is why I'm in bed, because I can. So today we are going to talk about the covenant that God had with Moses. So far we have done Adam and Eve. Well, the covenant was with Adam, and then we moved on to Noah, then we moved on to Abraham, and now we're moving on to Moses. Now here's a few tidbits that I need you guys to remember as we go through this. Remember that with Adam, with the very first creation story, when people were made in the image and likeness of God, we were made to be caretakers of the world. We have a different type of awareness, and God established a role for us. We were to basically be within a niche. We were to be Christ for others. We were to behave in a certain way. And the original sin that people experienced in the story with Adam and Eve, remember, it's not a scientific story or necessarily a historical story, but as the story tells us, God had a niche for us to fit in, and we were like, nope, not going to do it. So Adam was thrown out of the garden, and the cherub was placed at the east. Now, again, the importance is because the garden represents a temple, and the doors always faced east. Now, this is going to be extremely important when we finally make it to the portion about the Eucharist, because if you guys remember, right before Jesus is crucified, he goes back out into a garden, the Garden of Gethsemane. So this is important because we get creation starting over. We had creation with Adam. Adam was not fit to be the priest, so he was removed from the temple. Then we move on to Noah. Creation starts over with the flood. Noah was meant to be that priest. He did not fulfill his role. He also got drunk and got naked. We moved on to Abraham. Abraham is where we get this parallel with who Christ is going to be. Isaac is... he carries wood on his back for 3 days up to the top of Mount Moriah to be sacrificed. And actually, Isaac asks his dad prior to this, who's going to be the sacrifice? What are we sacrificing to God? And Abraham's response is, God will provide a lamb. Eventually, Jesus is that lamb that God provides. Another tidbit that I want you guys to remember, they were traveling up to the top of Mount Moriah to sacrifice Isaac. The sacrifice did not happen. Mount Moriah is actually one of the peaks, and one of the other peaks of this mountain is Calvary, where Jesus was killed. So we also have that side by side. So here's just a handful of things that I want you guys to hold on to while we continue to talk. Now, Moses is the author of these first 5 books of the Bible. So Moses also gives us his story. How did God call him? And this story is probably one of the ones that you're most likely already familiar with. So this is how it goes. Moses, when his mother was pregnant with him, at that time they were slaves in Egypt. And Pharaoh had said, to control the slave population, to make sure that I keep them under my thumb, I want all of the firstborn boys to be killed. Now, it was originally told to the midwives. The midwives are women that go and help other women have babies. So Pharaoh had said to the Israelite midwives, kill the babies as they're born. The midwives didn't do it. So then Pharaoh sent his soldiers to kill the babies. Now, Moses' mom had hid him as long as she could. And finally, she put him into the water. She put him in a basket in the water, and he is floated in this basket straight to Pharaoh's daughter, where she found him and ended up raising him as one of her own children. So he actually grew up in an Egyptian palace next to Ramesses, who would eventually be the Pharaoh that he has to challenge to free the Israelites. Now, there's some important things that I want to note here. First off, Moses means I drew him out of the water. So when Pharaoh's daughter named him Moses, his mother didn't name him Moses, Pharaoh's daughter did. She named him, I drew him out of the water. Now, when Christ immediately begins his ministry, so we have Christ as a child, as a baby, King Herod was trying to kill Jesus, just like Pharaoh was trying to kill all of those firstborn babies. And Jesus, whenever he begins his public ministry, whenever he goes out right before he starts, basically all the stories in the gospel, right at the very beginning of that, what he does is he goes into the water to be baptized, and he is drawn out of the water and shown to the people around him as the Son of God. So these are a couple parallels I want you guys to hang on to. So another thing I want you guys to note is that Egypt is a polytheistic society. So they believe in multiple gods. Now, monotheism is what we believe in. It's one God, and in Egypt it's polytheism. So Moses grew up in the palace, and when he was an adult, he knew he was an Israelite. He looked different than his brother, and he began to feel this like longing for the Israelite people because they are his family. At one point, he sees an Egyptian, like, I don't know what you call him, like just an Egyptian soldier, I think. And he saw this Egyptian beat to death one of the Israelite slaves. I don't know if you guys can hear my basset hound. She is playing on the floor with one of her toys and like moaning like a weirdo. Anyway, so that's what that weird background noise is. But Moses witnesses the Egyptian soldier beating one of the Israelites. And so Moses kills him. And then he flees and he runs out into the, I think it's Midian. I don't remember the name of the place. Anyway, he runs away. And when he is out in the desert, he, basically develops a new life. He marries somebody, he settles in with a family, he's very happy. And then God comes to him in the burning bush. He, basically Moses is out tending to the sheep, and then God calls him and speaks to him through a burning bush and says, you have to go back and free the Israelites. So Moses goes back to Egypt, and now his brother is in power. He has, his father has passed away. His brother is now the new Pharaoh. So he goes to his brother and he says, you have to free the slaves. And of course, his brother laughs at him. He's like, no, I'm not going to do that, but that's cute. In this story, Moses uses different plagues to urge Pharaoh to free the slaves. And they don't work. But here's something really interesting about the story. You actually get to pick if you want to view this as a literal story, like all of these plagues actually happened, or if you want to take it as symbolic. It's up to you. Every single plague that I'm sorry guys, I'm not together. Every single plague that Moses brings about actually challenges one of the Egyptian gods. The very first plague is he turns water into blood. Now, actually, Christ, the very first miracle Christ works is he turns water into wine, and then eventually he also turns wine into blood. So here's another parallel that we get with Christ. But the very first plague is Moses says, free my people. Pharaoh says no, and so the water of the Nile River, which is, they believed that the Nile River was the god Happy, turns to blood. So this shows God's power over the gods of Egypt. Can you guys hear my dog? Oh my gosh. So the next plague, because Pharaoh still does not free the slaves, is a plague of frogs. And this is actually Egypt had a frog-headed goddess. She's like hitting the bed and shaking the bed. I'm so sorry. They had a goddess with a frog head named Heket. So there was a plague of frogs. Again, this challenged Heket. So this continues on. We go through a series of plagues, and we're going to get to the important part in just a second. And this next part will be your writing prompt. But he turns the earth into lice, which that challenges the earth god Jeb. He challenges the god Khepri with flies, Hathor with livestock, Isis with boils, because Isis was the goddess of medicine, and so all of the people became sick. And it continues on. And then when we finally get to the last plague, which is the death of the firstborn children, this plague actually challenges Pharaoh himself, because Pharaoh was seen to be a god. Now, this is what's so interesting about the story, because a lot of us think like, okay, if somebody came to me and said, your children are going to die if you don't free the slaves, I'm going to free the slaves because I want to save my children. But there's a different dynamic here, because Egyptians believed their kings to be actual gods. Like, this was a deep belief. So Pharaoh fully believed, I am a god. No one's going to tell me what to do. So we have an interesting play on pride here. So Moses goes to his brother and he was like, listen, you have to free the slaves. The final plague is going to be that the angel of darkness comes and kills the firstborn children. And Pharaoh says no. He says, I'm not going to free them. So what Moses does is, this is where the Passover meal is instituted. I want you guys, as you're writing prompt, to write for me what the rules are for Passover. And then there's going to be another writing prompt at the end of this. But that's your first one, is the rules of Passover. So Moses goes to the Israelites and he says, here are the rules that all of us must follow so that the angel of death passes over us, hence the name Passover. And this is actually probably going to start to sound a little bit similar to our Mass, because this is where it comes from. Every family was instructed to take an unblemished lamb, kill it, drain the blood out of it, cook it, eat it, take the blood, take a hyssop branch, dip it in the blood, and mark the doorpost of your home with the blood. Now, this is important because the hyssop branch is actually going to be one of the markers that's used in the Gospel of John for us to understand Christ and his crucifixion as replacing this Passover lamb. So that's something that we need to hold on to. So you are to take an unblemished lamb, kill it, everyone in the household has to eat it, and upon completion of this, that is when the angel of death will pass over your house and you will not be harmed. Your children will not be harmed. So the Israelites do this. The next day, the angel of death has killed Pharaoh's son, and Pharaoh finally releases the Israelites. And that's when they pack up their stuff and leave. So what happens in the story is the Israelites are moving on, and as they're about to cross the Red Sea, which is actually, Christ passes through the Jordan River, passes through the water before he begins his ministry as well. As they are getting ready to go into the desert, that's when Pharaoh changes his mind. So the waters have been parted so that the Israelites can go through the waters. Pharaoh ends up coming after the Israelites, and before Pharaoh can catch up with the Israelites, the water collapses and swallows Pharaoh up. Now, what we're going to talk about next week is going to be what happens to the Israelites as they wander in the desert for 40 years. So remember what I said about writing about what the rules of Passover are. The unblemished lamb, everybody in the household has to kill a lamb, drain the blood, mark their doorpost with a hyssop branch, and every family must participate in eating the lamb. Another rule is no bones of it can be broken. So I want you guys to mark those down in your writing prompt. Additionally, please write down just a few of the similarities that I mentioned between Moses and Jesus. Next week, we're going to talk about the Israelites in the desert with the manna and all the other fun things. And we are only going to have 2 videos this month. So this video, one more video about manna and their time in the desert, and then we're taking a break and we'll come back at the start of December. So keep an eye out for that. I hope all of you are enjoying the videos. If you have any questions, please let me know. Bye.